In discussing the large-scale structure of the cosmos, astronomers sometimes say that space is curved, or that the universe is finite but unbounded. Whatever are they talking about? Let's imagine that we are perfectly flat. I mean absolutely flat. And that we live, appropriately enough, in a flatland. A land designed and named by Edwin Abbott, a Shakespearean scholar who lived in Victorian England. Everybody in flatland is, of course, exceptionally flat. We have squares, circles, triangles, and we all scurry about, and we can go into our houses and do our flat business. Now, we have width and length, but no height at all. Now, these little cutouts have some little height, but let's ignore that. Let's imagine that these are absolutely flat. That being the case, we know, us flatlanders, about left-right, and we know about forward-back, but we have never heard of up-down. Let us imagine that into flatland, hovering above it, comes a strange three-dimensional creature which, oddly enough, looks like an apple. And the three-dimensional creature sees an attractive, congenial-looking square, watches it enter its house, and decides in a gesture of interdimensional amity to say hello. "Hello," says the three-dimensional creature. "How are you? I am a visitor from the third dimension." Well, the poor square looks around his closed house, sees no one there, and what's more, has witnessed a greeting coming from his insides, a voice from within. He surely is getting a little worried about his sanity. The three-dimensional creature is unhappy about being considered a psychological aberration, and so he descends to actually enter flatland. Now, a three-dimensional creature exists in flatland only partially. Only a plane, a cross-section through him can be seen. So when the three-dimensional creature first reaches flatland, it's only the points of contact which can be seen, and we'll represent that by stamping the apple in this ink pad and placing that image in flatland. And as the apple were to descend through, slither by flatland, we would progressively see higher and higher slices, which we can represent by cutting the apple. So the square, as time goes on, sees a set of objects mysteriously appear from nowhere and inside a closed room and change their shape dramatically. His only conclusion could be that he's gone bonkers. Well, the apple might be a little annoyed at this conclusion, and so, not such a friendly gesture from dimension to dimension, makes a contact with the square from below and sends our flat creature fluttering and spinning above flatland. At first, the square has no idea what's happening. He's terribly confused. This is utterly outside his experience. But after a while, he comes to realize that he is seeing inside closed rooms in flatland. He is looking inside his fellow flat creatures. He is seeing flatland from a perspective no one has ever seen it before to his knowledge. Getting into another dimension provides as an incidental benefit a kind of X-ray vision. Now our flat creature slowly descends to the surface, and his friends rush up to see him. From their point of view, he has mysteriously appeared from nowhere. He hasn't walked from somewhere else. He's come from some other place. They say, "For heaven's sake, what's happened to you?" And the poor square has to say, "Well, I was in some other mystic dimension called up." And they will pat him on his side and comfort him, or else they'll ask, "Well, show us, where is that third dimension? Point to it." And the poor square will be unable to comply. But maybe more interesting is the other direction in dimensionality. What about the fourth dimension? Now, to approach that, let's consider a cube. We can imagine a cube in the following way. You take a line segment and move it at right angles to itself in equal length. That makes a square. Move that square in equal length at right angles to itself, and you have a cube. Now, this cube, we understand, casts a shadow. And that shadow we recognize. It's, ordinarily drawn in third grade classrooms as two squares with their vertices connected. Now, if we look at the shadow of a three-dimensional object in 2 dimensions, we see that, in this case, not all the lines appear equal. Not all the angles are right angles. The three-dimensional object has not been perfectly represented in its projection in 2 dimensions, but that's part of the cost of losing a dimension in the projection. Now, let's take this three-dimensional cube and project it, carry it through a 4th physical dimension. Not that way, not that way, not that way, but at right angles to those 3 directions. I can't show you what direction that is, but imagine that there is a 4th physical dimension. In that case, we would generate a 4-dimensional hypercube, which is also called a tesseract. I cannot show you a tesseract because I and you are trapped in 3 dimensions. But what I can show you is the shadow in 3 dimensions of a 4-dimensional hypercube or tesseract. This is it. And you can see it's 2 nested cubes, all the vertices connected by lines. And now the real tesseract in 4 dimensions would have all the lines of equal length and all the angles right angles. That's not what we see here, but that's the penalty of projection. So you see, while we cannot imagine the world of 4 dimensions, we can certainly think about it perfectly well.
And then in terms of multidimensionality, that kind of thing, the framework that I'm familiar with, for example, is something called the holographic principle. It derives itself from general relativity and quantum mechanics, and that is, if you want to imagine a 3D object such as yourself casting a shadow onto a 2D surface, that's the holographic principle. So you can be projected, quasi-projected from higher dimensional space to lower dimensional. It's a scientific trope that you can actually cross, literally, as far as I understand, but there's probably guys with PhDs that we could probably argue about that.
But you have not seen any documentation that that's what's occurring?
Only a theoretical framework discussion, yes.
Okay.
When we started TTSA back in the day, we had discussions about this all the time. Are we sure we want to bring this out? I mean, are we going to scare 8-year-olds? I've had friends of mine who, my daughter wants to know all about UFOs. Can she talk to you about it? And I would say, no, I'm not talking to you about this. What am I going to tell her or him? These little kids, 10, 11 years old. Yeah, that there's a force that exists out there that can control our environment, that can put thoughts in your head, that can lie to you, trick you, deceive you, and that you're not in control of your life. Say that to a 12-year-old. I mean, we're already saying it to a certain extent.
How would you, as a higher intelligence, represent yourself to a lesser intelligence?
Do you think they saw what they say they saw?
It didn't just start showing up in 1947.
How hard do you think it is for aliens to communicate with humans?
What do we believe in? We believe in technology. So you show yourself as a form of technology, right? But the common thread is you're not alone. And there's something else here with you. And there's something that's, as you said, watching you.
The Butlers have reportedly experienced all kinds of poltergeist phenomena in their home since the UFO flap began in Owatonna in 1966. Objects have been moving about of their own accord. Glass objects have suddenly and visibly shattered without cause. And strange noises have resounded throughout the house.
We had good control of the environment, but not enough to aggravate the performance. Like if you had cameras, you're aggravating it.
Mm-hmm. So the ball and jack experiment, can you explain that for our viewers?
So We got good-sized jacks that were probably an inch square and a ball the size of a golf ball, roughly. Maybe a little smaller. And so our ranch manager and one of our security officers used the kitchen table in the double-wide trailer to set it up.
Yeah.
So they arranged them in a circle, and they put the ball in the middle of the circle.
Right.
And we took a photograph. And they weren't done very neatly. And the reason we knew that is because after they were acted upon, we saw how neatly they were set up. Okay. So they were set up so the ranch manager, security guy go outside. There's nobody else in the trailer. They wait 30 seconds and come back in. Nothing's been changed. They go back outside. They wait a minute. They come back in. Everything's changed. It's not a circle. It's a horseshoe. The ball is outside of the horseshoe. All of the jacks were paired in color. In fact, when we did the before and after photographs, I had Charles had photographs there, and I said, "Now, look at these jacks. What do you notice?" Well, he didn't make a comment too much, but I said, "Well, look, every single color is that we have pairs of colors, and they're all paired."
It sounds as if it was some sort of an effort to really communicate.
I think that's what demonstrations are. I think that, you have 1,000 different kinds or 1,000,000 different kinds of demonstrations in the consciousness world. And I think all of that is a communication. It's not just, oh, here, look at me, I moved something for you. It's, I moved something, now figure out what it took to move it. Why did it move? How did it move? And so you start thinking about that and you realize, well, it's not in our physics, and it's in another dimension is interacting in our dimension. And with ease, with impunity, with ease, and any time, and very powerfully.
I said earlier in our interview, in order to get extraordinary results, you have to put forth extraordinary effort. I was using that as a business reference, that it takes sacrifice to get results. And this ranch investigation is no different. I think we're all sacrificing. We're all locking arms and trying to determine the nature of what is happening. It isn't a function of proving that there's something happening. That's already done. It's being able to identify the origin and the identity associated with the phenomena that drives me. And I think you can expect to see in the future, hopefully, some communication. I think whatever we're dealing with is highly intelligent. I will not be surprised if at some point we are able to somehow determine how to communicate, or at least see, I think, more intelligent interaction.
So you think this, what do you call this?
Well, those who came before me with the Bigelow team called it a precognitive nonsense. There's a term. They refer to the phenomena at Skinwalker Ranch as a precognitive, sentient, non-human intelligence.
So there's
an intelligence based on the data. There is an intelligence operating on that ranch that has command over space, time, over consciousness, can manipulate closed systems in a split second without leaving a trace, and I believe has the ability to communicate if we can understand or develop a common language at some point to be able to interact. Eric Bard, in particular, has had communication with at least one of these entities involved with manipulating the systems, that has command over the technology and the platforms, and has expounded on that a little bit. He'll be, I think, addressing that a bit more in the future. We're going to be discussing it on the docuseries this next year. But he's definitely seen and documented evidence that we're dealing with an intelligence that does have the desire to communicate.
What can you go into the communication a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, in his case, when he asked out of frustration for a sign, when he commanded when the systems were being manipulated and he was dealing with security violations that were occurring repeatedly with our surveillance cameras, he literally asked verbally out loud, if you have something to show me, show me. If you have something to tell me, tell me. And in that instant, the screen morphed, melted, and digitally composed letters. He had the presence of mind, just as he did in October 2016, to screen capture what was happening with his iPhone. Thank heavens he proceeded to record and screen capture in real time what was happening with the equipment. And what was revealed was what I believe to be compelling evidence that we're dealing with an intelligence that is at least willing to acknowledge and wants their presence known.
Were you able to translate it into anything?
Yeah, it'll be shown on television, but it essentially had the simple response, again, instantaneously, of I living.
You're shitting me.
So
Whoa.
Eric Bard, in response to a host of issues with the security cameras registering that there was something triggering the motion sensors, that there were countless events occurring. Upon giving that command, saw the entire screen morph and form the letters I living, and then snap back.
But I remember when it came out on that fateful day, the story was wrong. And I got a hold of Leslie and I said, it's not about $22 million and the Pentagon has a UFO program. It's about there's an entity out there. There's some kind of non-human intelligence that's living with us on this fucking planet. I'm sorry, I'm getting all wound up. That's the story. And she said they wouldn't let me run it like that. And it's still very, very difficult. So I give the New York Times a lot of credit for running this story, but for missing the big point. We're not alone, and we never have been alone.
Am I wrong to have sensed a little bit of urgency in this as well?
There is a sense of urgency because people said, well, why now? Well, because it's not on our time scale, not on our timeline. It's not up to us. They're here, whether we want to acknowledge it or not. They're here. The question is why? What's the purpose? We need to start asking ourselves some pretty direct questions about this topic. There is a sense of urgency because every day that we fail to acknowledge and recognize what's really going on, we stay in the veil of darkness. This is real. This is here. This is now. Our country has already acknowledged. I mean, I hate to say this, but disclosure's already happened. We now have the acknowledgement from former and current directors of national intelligence and CIA and presidents and I mean, everybody says, yeah, it's real. It's here. Now the question is, we don't know what it is or where it's from or what they want and who's behind the wheel and intentions and whatnot. So to some regard, the hard part is still yet to come.